shows how wrong Putin got it, though. Putin believed that his troops would race through Ukraine in a matter of days. He believed that we in Ukraine and in the democratic West would not be able to join forces in a manner that would really help Ukraine. He believed that he could dry out solidarity in the EU by turning off the gas taps. But none of Putin's plans have come to fruition. Because Putin got it wrong. He underestimated the courage of Ukrainians, of Europeans, of us, of the character of our democracies, and our will to protest hegemony and imperialism. Ladies and gentlemen, that is the real story of this year, 2022. Ukraine is resisting Russian aggression, but so are we. We have taken on the challenge. Together with our friends and partners, we have supported Ukraine decisively in financial, humanitarian and military means. We are continuing this support as long as it takes. And this is part of why Ukrainian forces are still fighting so successfully. And because that is the case, Ukraine has started massively destroying Ukrainian infrastructure, shooting old ladies and children, civilians. What a dreadful strategy, a burnt earth strategy. But Putin will not win this way either, because Ukrainians are resolute in resisting him, and because we are supporting Ukraine with everything Ukraine needs in order to resist this base type of warfare. Power generators and transformers are part of what we are offering, as well as the artillery and the Leopard tanks from Germany that are helping to shoot down Russian aircraft trying to bomb Ukraine. And now, more than ever, it is about offering support for Ukraine in terms of heat, power, and water, which is why I'm so grateful to our French colleagues, particularly Emmanuel Macron, for the Solidarity Conference he held yesterday, where it was about looking at how we can improve the resilience of Ukraine and keep that critical infrastructure going or restore it. In the European Council meeting, we will be looking at this as well. At the same time, we are ensuring that Ukraine in 2023 gets the money it needs to survive. Together with international partners, Europe has offered a great deal of financial support for Ukraine together with our partners. For 2023, the EU will give 18 billion euros to Ukraine in terms of additional funding. Because Ukraine must have the resilience to get through this winter. Looking to the future, let me say, however, anyone who believes that the basic values of the EU, which all EU member states are committed to, can be played off against the foreign and security and defense policy of the EU is doomed to fail. Ladies and gentlemen, working on the Marshall Plan for the long-term restoration of EU is making progress. In October, we had leading experts here in Berlin to come up with concepts for the future of Ukraine. Now we are working to form an international donor platform to coordinate the reconstruction of Ukraine. The day before yesterday, we met with our G7 partners and the EU to set vectors for this platform. At the same time, in G7, we will continue to work together worldwide to support the weakest from the impact of this war, Russia using them in a targeted manner as a weapon. At the same time, we are stepping up the sanction pressure on Putin's regime. The embargo on oil from Russia is stepping this up as well. Sanctions against Russia will continue to be maintained, and we will step them up, matching Putin's continuing war of aggression on Ukraine. Ladies and gentlemen, the Russian war of aggression on Ukraine is a challenge for EU cohesion. But this challenge is one we have taken on head-on, and together we are strong. Since the 24th of February, Ukraine has joined forces in an unprecedented manner, and the German government has worked hard on this. We have supported our partners, and we have been supported by them. And this is European solidarity in the flesh. And in terms of defending our freedom and security in Europe, we have worked intensely in recent months here in Germany and in Europe. Within NATO, defense policy has been recalibrated. Our alliance partners know they can depend on us. They know that if necessary, we will defend every centimeter of the alliance territory. And for this, we have approved a 100 billion euro special fund for the modernization of the German armed forces, the greatest fund we have had of this kind. And we are finally tackling the problem of our armed forces, and we are also contributing to US F-35 fighter aircraft and doing our bit within NATO. This year and the next 2 years, we will have 70,000 soldiers for the NATO Rapid Response Force. And in 2023, we will take on the leadership of the Rapid Response Force. And 2023, we will have 30,000 soldiers permanently available for NATO. And we are present in Slovakia with Air Force and armed forces as well as in Estonia, and our Navy presence in the Baltic Sea is bolstered as well. And in Lithuania, we have supported the force present there, and as a result are defending the entire Baltic states, together with Norway and other states. We are supporting and protecting critical infrastructure onshore and offshore. And 3 months ago, I was in Prague, and I suggested that we set up an anti-missile defense shield to increase European capabilities within NATO. And this is all good. It is good that there are 15 partners who have already joined our initiative. And it is also good that in the EU we have decided that our partners worldwide, particularly Ukraine, will continue to get support from our peace facility. All of these measures don't just strengthen the security of our friends and allies, they ensure our own security as well. All of these measures bolster the trust of all of our partners in our willingness to take on responsibility within the alliance. And we set this course on the 24th of February and have pursued it since then steadfastly. Ladies and gentlemen, Europe's security also means Europe's energy security. There is no other sector where we have made so much progress so fast. Nothing proves this more clearly than opening the first liquid gas terminal in Ludwigshafen. We started building it in July, and this first LNG terminal is now ready to go online. This week, the first LNG ship will be arriving in the port. I've been announcing this for months, and for months people have looked at me saying, "What, this year? That's never going to work." And presumably Vladimir Putin thought the same. But It did get finished, and the next terminals are happening in Lubmin and in Stade and Wilhelmsbüttel. And I think I speak for all of us, or at least for nearly all of us in this parliament, when I say thank you to all of the workers, all of the engineers who worked so fast to achieve this amazing project so quickly. And I want to thank you for the fact that we will get through this winter well together. You represent millions of citizens in our country who are just getting down to work, expressing cohesion, working hard to ensure that we get through this winter together. And every single one of you matters. Our relief packages, our 200 billion defense protection against Russian aggression means that we are doing everything we can to ease the burden on our citizens and our companies. And this is the way that we will get through these troubled times together. It is the only way forward. Ladies and gentlemen, together means together in Europe as well. Like never before, we have worked so closely together in the energy transition, and we have agreed on easing the burden of the increased power prices. We've also worked on procurement for gas so that we can fill our reservoirs next year too. But one thing is clear, there's no quick fix here. We cannot intervene in the prices to the extent that there's not enough gas being brought to Europe. And this is important. At the Energy Council in the EU that began its work yesterday on this issue, and I'm sure that if we stay pragmatic, we will achieve good results here. Ladies and gentlemen, in another way, Putin's war has accelerated necessary change for our transition to renewable energy. The German government was in favor of this since it was formed here, but we don't just need renewable energies because of the climate crisis. We need it for our own security so that we are never again too dependent on power and fossil fuel deliveries. And this is why we are working to achieve a zero-carbon Europe, and we are making progress more quickly as a result of this. Many elements of the package Fit for 55 of the EU are still being negotiated. We are advocating ambitious targets for a courageous jump into the next era of EU industrial history, where we have zero-carbon technology creating new prosperity on this basis. Ladies and gentlemen, in the process of EU enlargement, Putin has actually accelerated things as well. Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia have opened negotiations to accession, but the accession process of the Western Balkans has been stepped up as well. And this is something that is particularly close to my heart. The Berlin Process Summit on the 3rd of November in the Chancelleries showed that conflicts of the past, as we sense again and again, are not over but can be overcome. Progress towards becoming an EU membership is possible, and this assessment was one that I announced in Tirana at the EU Western Balkans Summit as well. And I will continue to energetically push for this tomorrow at the EU summit and next year as well. And it is right and good that Bosnia-Herzegovina this week has become an EU accession candidate as well. It is very much in Germany's interest, as well as in Europe's interest, that the Western Balkans become part of the European Union. And it is also in our interest that Croatia from 2023 will be part of the Schengen area, and it's in our interest that Romania and Bulgaria follow on their footsteps soon. It hasn't been done yet, but we must make progress along this path. Ladies and gentlemen, Putin's war has also accelerated many questions that we had about Europe's role globally. I will be going now to the EU-ASEAN summit today. It will be the first meeting of the EU and ASEAN leaders in this constellation. Together, the 10 ASEAN countries have an enormous population, and we have 450 million here in Europe. And if we just imagine a bipolar era in which everything is just about the US and China, this is completely missing the reality of the world. Naturally, we cannot question that the US plays an important role. And naturally, there's rivalry between the US and China. Our important partner, the US, shares many values with Europe as well. This year showed once again just how crucial the transatlantic partnership is. Naturally, there are differences in certain views. The U.S. investment in climate protection has contributed significantly to transforming the U.S. economy. And we have to say, for a very long time, we would have liked to have seen the U.S. pursuing this before they actually did. But still, they mustn't prevent fair competition. And this is why I very much support that the European Commission is conducting intense talks with the U.S. I have had these conversations with the President, and so has the French leadership, because we cannot allow ourselves to be divided in our transatlantic partnership. Instead of a major conflict, we need to work more closely together with one another to ensure common, fair trade with the U.S. Ladies and gentlemen, China's rise to a world power is a fact, and we need to engage with it. It would be wrong to think that we should decouple or any other approach. That wouldn't be the right way forward. As an economic partner, China remains important for us, and there are many global issues that we need to discuss with China, particularly where we have different views. When I visited China recently, I made it clear that Germany and Europe want an international order based on rules anchored in the UN Charter of Human Rights. Our concerns about the uncertainty in the South China Seas and the Strait of Taiwan are things that I formulated in no uncertain terms. And this was important. But it was also important that President Xi and myself agreed on one decisive point. We agreed that even threatening with the deploying of nuclear weapons is not possible, and that using nuclear weapons would cross a line in the sand that humanity has drawn for a very good reason. I very much hope that this clear message we sent out together was heard in Moscow. With its megalomania and imperialism, Russia is very much isolated. At the G20 summit, this was particularly clear. Ladies and gentlemen, the world in the 21st century is a multipolar world, and tackling the major questions of biodiversity, digitization, climate change, and pandemics means we must join forces. It's not just about diversifying our supply chains, it's about our connections and ties to all corners of the earth. We need close relationships with emerging economies in Latin America, the Caribbean, Asia, and Africa, which is why at the G7 summit in Elma, we invited important leaders of the Global South. And this is why this year I went to countries like Vietnam, Singapore, Japan, Indonesia, South Africa, Niger, and Senegal. This is why I invited President Modi to come as well. And This is why we used the entire G7 to found a cooperative climate club in order to tackle climate change together. It is good news that at the end of our presidency that the G7 has approved this climate club we initiated. We will quickly be approaching other states as well, so that the climate club can become even more powerful in combating climate change. Ladies and gentlemen, no one is suffering from Russia's war of aggression like Ukrainians, and we stand with them. But in Germany as well, Putin's war has created enormous challenges. These challenges we have tackled. Together, we have grown stronger in tackling these challenges. And those who did not believe that we can do it, they got it completely wrong. So that's the good news at the end of this bitter year, and that must make us optimistic. Together in Germany, we have set the right course. We hold together, and no one can divide us.
And if you're just joining us, we've been listening to German Chancellor Olaf Scholz addressing Parliament here in Berlin ahead of a key EU summit. The EU is going to be holding a joint summit with the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN. In his address to Parliament, Scholz talked a lot about Ukraine. He said that Putin got it wrong in Ukraine. He underestimated the will of He said that Putin underestimated the will of Europe and Ukraine to resist Russian aggression, and he insisted that Putin will not win. He noted that efforts by the EU and the G7 countries to support Ukrainian resilience will continue. He did acknowledge, however, that the war has been a challenge for European unity, but the war has also accelerated the energy transition, he said, towards a zero-carbon future, and it's also accelerated EU enlargement, mentioning membership prospects for Ukraine, Moldova, and the Western Balkans. On transatlantic relations, he noted that the partnership is still crucial, very important, but calling for fair trade in light of the Inflation Reduction Act, which has raised protectionist concerns. Our political correspondent, Nina Hase, has been following that speech and joins us now from the Bundestag. Nina, your reactions?
Well, I mean, it is almost a traditional ritual for the German Chancellor to hold a big speech ahead of big EU summits. And of course, Olaf Scholz is travelling to Brussels, and there are two very important summits coming up in Brussels, the EU-ASEAN summit today, and then the meeting of the EU leaders tomorrow. And these speeches that the German Chancellor then gives are always an opportunity to hear it from the horse's mouth, if you will, just what he thinks where Germany is standing and what the strategic visions are. So this was important. It was an important message by Olaf Scholz to European leaders, saying Germany does stand by Ukraine and is willing to sacrifice some of its own projects for support of Ukraine. Also, he expects a long discussion about the right instrument, just how to bring energy prices down. So that was clearly a message to European leaders. But in many ways, Olaf Scholz just took score of what he thinks he has achieved during this first year in office, which, of course, has been, many people, even his critics, acknowledge the most difficult first year a German chancellor has had since the end of the Second World War. So he outlined many of the projects that have come underway, and he also, like you said, acknowledged that, yes, Germany is also facing difficulties. And this was a message also to German voters, because there is a growing sentiment here that, yes, we do need to support Ukraine, but of course high energy prices are very much something that many people are becoming increasingly concerned about here.
As you say, Nina, this is a pretty standard set piece of a speech that the Chancellor of Germany addresses Parliament just before a key EU summit. Did Scholz say anything that we really haven't heard before? Anything new coming out today?
I believe it is something where you essentially get it in a nutshell from himself. I mean, all the projects that he described are very much something that we have heard of before, but he highlighted, for example, that the climate club that didn't get much media coverage, for example, that he's been pushing for several months now, that has now been agreed by the G7. And it's these instruments, and it's typical Olaf Scholz style. He works on something behind the scenes. These things don't necessarily get much coverage, but he then can say that he did get things done. The same goes for the LNG terminals. He said himself in his speech that nobody expected Germany to be able to build such a massive infrastructure project within a couple of months. Germany is known to be slow when it comes to these big infrastructure projects. But then Olaf Scholz said, I was convinced back in the summer that we would see the first ship arriving at a port delivering liquefied natural gas, and see what's happening. We're going to be greeting the first ship this Saturday. So it's very much an opportunity where you get Olaf Scholz and a summary of the projects that he's been working on, and to get it from himself in a nutshell. But no, there were no big new announcements.
Nina, thank you so much. Our chief political correspondent, Nina Hase. Let's catch up on some other stories making headlines around the world today. Peru's armed forces are ramping up security of key infrastructure as nationwide protests continue following the ouster of former President Pedro Castillo. Castillo has been denied bail as authorities build a rebellion case against him. It's feared the court decision could further inflame violent protests. A snowstorm has pounded the